You know what? It's hard. I try not to let it bother me, but I've worked really hard to not be that person anymore. I guess maybe it is a little bit of guilt. I was meant to be a mother and I did everything I could to try and get her back. I wanted our family to be whole again. And it just wasn't with her not there.
Logan City, Queensland, a city within the south of Brisbane metropolitan area of Australia, didn't have the best reputation. This city, like a lot of places, had its nice parts, but it is known for its high crime and its diversity that many people are still proud to call home. And one of those who called Logan City home was little Tiahleigh Palmer. Tiahleigh Alyssa Rose Palmer, whose loved ones called Tia, and so that is how I will refer to her throughout this story, was born on April 13th, 2003 to her New Zealand mother, Cindy Palmer. Cindy admits that unfortunately, and in her words, that she wasn't able to sufficiently provide for Tia while she was involved in a severe domestic violence relationship and felt like at any time she may have been unalived, which is the censored version for YouTube.
How was it that Tiahleigh was in foster care?
Basically, I put her there.
And why was that?
Because I was suffering through a very severe domestic violence situation. So I actually went to the department for help because I realized that one day I was just going to die.
Therefore, Cindy did what she thought was the best thing for her baby girl, and in 2010 Cindy placed 7-year-old Tia into the foster care system. Now, even though Cindy knew she had to get herself together, she still continued to head in a downward spiral of drugs and homelessness, which of course didn't allow her to get Tia back into her care.
At first, I was so devastated being apart from her that I spiraled out of control into drugs and homelessness.
And actually, to this day, Cindy does feel like that was the best decision that she could have made for Tia.
I still firmly believe that the day that I went to the department asking for help, I made the right decision. It's not what I wanted, and it wasn't the outcome any of us wanted. But at the end of the day, that was, I thought, was the safer option.
In 2013, a woman named Julie Pemberton took care of 9-year-old Tia for 2 years, and she was a saint for Tia. However, unfortunately, the woman ended up getting sick and was no longer able to care for her adequately. Therefore, Tia had to be rehoused. And in January of 2015, 11-year-old Tia was placed into the home of Rick and Julene Thorburn with their 2 teenage sons, Trent and Joshua. The Thorburns resided on isolated property in a semi-rural area south of Brisbane. Rick and Julene were approved as foster parents in August of 2014, and they would specifically request children who had high complex needs, including highly sexualized behaviors. Now, although it's not stated why they had these requests, it is firmly believed that the reason was for monetary gains. Apparently, children who were high complex needs came with the best pay rates for the foster parents. Cindy expressed that she had her reservations about Tia going to live with the Thorburn family from the beginning because they had teenage boys in the home. Plus, she was really concerned about what Rick had told her about himself upon meeting each other. You see, Cindy stated that Rick was boasting about being some gun-toting gangbanger back in the days when he was younger, which was really odd coming from someone who's supposed to be a father figure fostering children. Plus, quite frankly, nobody even asked him for this information. Tia was a student at Marsden State High School, a secondary school for children between the ages of 7 and 12, located in Waterford West, Queensland. And Tia was known for enjoying school. She enjoyed being around her friends. She never really had an issue while she was in school, and she was normally dropped off and picked up by her foster parents. But on October 30th, 2015, instead of getting ready for some fun Halloween activities like most kids her age, Tia was reported missing. Rick had been the one to make the report, saying he had dropped Tia off at school shortly after 8 a.m., but she never made it home. Well, there actually were no reports of her attendance in any of her classes at all that day, and in fact, it was later revealed that she was actually planning on skipping school the day of her disappearance. And Rick was distraught. He was crying, he was stressed, he was very emotional about Tia's disappearance. So much so that the social worker from the agency he worked for had to escort him to the police station for him to make the missing persons report because he was just way too upset to drive himself.
Rick's demeanour, his behaviour, he became very emotional right from the start. He's broken down in tears, so much so that the social worker actually had to drive him to the police station to report her missing.
The hunt for Tia was on. Her mother searched with police high and low for her baby girl. She even took public transportation in hopes of trying to find her daughter somewhere, anywhere. However, the gut-wrenching realization that her chances of being found alive were becoming more and more slim as the days went by, and there was still no sign of Tia. And then, on November 5th, 2015, in the banks of the Pimpama River, south of Brisbane, 6 days after being reported missing, Tia's body was found by 3 fishermen, and it was said that her body was so badly decomposed, officials couldn't even tell what her gender was initially. A little more than a week following the discovery of her body, Tia's funeral was held on November 14th, 2015, in which the entire Thorburn family was in attendance. Police had offered a cash reward for anyone who was able to come forward with information leading to any arrests that could be made on behalf of said info. However, for 6 months following the discovery of Tia's body, investigators weren't able to come up with any solid leads. And while initially police had their radar on the Thorburns, naturally so, since the closest loved ones are always looked at first when foul play is involved, they still weren't suspects at this point just yet, until one day a tipper had called Crime Stoppers hotline with some solid information. A Facebook message that was sent from 18-year-old Trent Thorburn. He said on a Monday, when his parents went out to run errands, him and Tia were home alone together. He made accusations that Tia forced him to have sex with her. And how was she able to force him? Well, he said she threatened to unalive his dog if he didn't engage with her. He said he never had sex before, and he was so worried about his parents finding out because he knew that Tia was his parents' best source of income and didn't want to cause any trouble for them. So he claimed to have agreed to these terms with Tia and went on to have sex with her. Apparently, the person he sent the message to had advised him to tell his parents anyway, and he said he was afraid of getting in trouble and there was a possibility that she may have even been pregnant. But he took the advice in his messages and went on to have a family meeting amongst him and the rest of the Thorburns to talk about what had happened. And with this new information in the investigators' possession, they have reverted their attention back to the Thorburns and what involvement, if any, did they have in Tia's demise. Now, with this information circulating, the Thorburns became a spectacle, constantly being surveillanced. Every single thing they did, every move they made was being watched like bacteria under a microscope. Detective Damian Hansen said the family did know that they were being watched, but what they didn't know was that their home was bugged, and every inkling of every conversation they had amongst themselves was actually being recorded. And these recordings had been made available for public consumption. In the recordings, the family can be heard having very candid conversations about what lies they needed to keep up with and how they were going to cover their own asses for whatever happened to Tia. Now, at some point, Julene began to crack at home, and this was evident in her conversations with her oldest son, Joshua. She can be heard telling him, if need be, they'll have to quote-unquote come clean to protect themselves, and especially Trent, because Dad was the one who decided to, quote, go down that path, end quote. But protect themselves from what exactly? And what path did Rick decide to go down? It was very clear based on these recordings and the tip about the Facebook messages from Trent that the Thorburns had everything to do with the unfortunate ending of Tia's life. Investigators were able to corner the three stooges, Julene, Josh, and Trent, with the evidence they had so far and use it as proof of perjury because they had already lied about not knowing what happened to Tia. And the recordings of Julene and Josh's conversations gave police leverage to utilize them as key witnesses to whatever Rick had done. Julene decided to come clean and tell them everything she knew.
He started to cry and he said, Mum, I've done something terrible. And he said, I've had a sexual encounter with Tia or something to those words.
Okay, I was going to say, but they
no, probably not the words, but yeah, I don't really remember exactly what it was then, but yeah, it indicated that he'd had a sexual encounter with Tia.
The message was clear.
It was, yeah. And, oh my God, mate.
So you were shocked?
I was absolutely stunned, shocked. I said, oh mate, how could you let something like that happen? And he sort of briefly expressed to me that she had come on to him and that she had threatened our Labrador's life if he didn't do it. So that really concerned me. I said, we will deal with it, try and get it out of your head sort of thing. I did say to Rick that Trent just came and told me that he'd had a sexual encounter with Tia, and Trent had indicated to me that it was the Sunday previous.
And how was his reaction?
But he was disturbed about it. And he was very concerned because he knows the implications for a boy of his age with a girl of her age. He was adamant about him doing jail time, that he'd go to jail for something like this. So Rick was, extremely concerned about that. And he said, don't ask any questions. And he couldn't allow Trent to go to jail. He just can't let it happen. We were concerned she could be pregnant or something.
And did you have that conversation with Rick at that time?
I think it did.
Okay.
It was mentioned.
Yeah.
That pains in the stomach. We were worried that she could be pregnant. Mm-hmm. We just all felt that that we had to keep it to ourselves and we would get Trent some help, like a psychologist, and make sure everything was all right.
The last time that you saw Tiahleigh Palmer alive, when was it?
In her bedroom, sitting on her bed. I said goodnight to her there.
Yeah.
And expressed to her that she needed to stay there and put herself to sleep when she was ready, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And where was Rick?
I think he was outside the kitchen door, like waiting for me to come back outside.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Was there anyone else in the house?
Nobody else in the house, no.
And then you left?
Mm-hmm. I said to Rick, was Tia okay? And I think he said something about, the exact words, it's all taken care of or something. I said, what do you mean by that? I said, don't worry, don't ask any questions, I've taken care of it. And I went to go to her room and he said, don't go in there. I said, why not? And he said, I told you it's sorted, it's taken care of. I said, what do you mean? He said, don't ask any questions. I guess I had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, but I couldn't really do much about it. If that's what he's done, I didn't want to see it or know anything about it. So he backed the car over to the shed, the big shed where all the cars are. That's all I saw.
What do you think he was doing at that point?
Putting her body in the boot of the car. I had a feeling that she could have been in his shed, but I didn't want to see her anyway.
Julene said after having a conversation with Trent about what happened with him and Tia, she told Rick what she had learned from Trent. And according to her, Rick was very upset and didn't want Trent getting into any trouble legally for what he done. So he said he would, quote unquote, handle it for Trent. Now at this point, Julene said on the night of October 29th, 2015, she left Tia alone at home with Rick, not thinking that anything bad would happen while she was gone, which I call bullshit, because if he kept saying things about, quote unquote, handling or taking care of Tia, why would you leave her in the house alone with him, especially after he refused to inform you of what he meant by, quote unquote, taking care of her and what that even entailed of. In my opinion, it's painfully obvious that she knew something horrible would happen to Tia, hence why she didn't want to be there. Well, when Julene got back home, she said she saw Rick putting Tia's lifeless body in the car and drove off with her to their shed. Rick had unalived little 12-year-old Tiahleigh Palmer. Joshua had also gave his confession of what he knew about Tia's disappearance and demise.
His exact words were, "Tia is no longer with us." And also he said, "I hope you understand what that means." I knew what he meant, that he'd killed her.
How was Dad's emotions at that time?
He didn't cry. He seemed quite assured and defensive of what he'd done and why he had done it. Obviously it was to protect Trent. That said also that he didn't want us home on the Friday night, so that he could do what he had to do, which was hide the body.
On the Friday night?
Friday night, yeah.
Here you can see he admits that he knew what Rick meant when he said he would take care of Tia. This whole ordeal was allegedly to protect Trent, but was that all?
If your son slept with an underage girl, then there's so many other ways to deal with it. You don't go and kill someone for it, I don't think. He could have turned him in. There had to be more going on than just what they're saying.
Clearly at this point, we know Rick's missing person report on Tia due to her not arriving at school was bogus. But when Rick was interrogated by detectives, he kept telling this fake story about dropping Tia off to school on the morning of October 30th, 2015.
Mate, is there anything you can tell me about this matter?
Nothing at all. I just, I dropped her off. So looked in the last time she knows. And off they go.
Even saying he sat in the car and waited at least 30 to 40 seconds to watch her go into the school. So investigators took a look at the CCTV surveillance outside the area of Tia's school, and sure enough, Rick was seen on surveillance driving past the school. He never stopped there. He never dropped Tia off. Instead, after driving past the school, he went home, removed Tia from the shed, put her body back into his car, drove to the river, and callously dumped her body there. And the Thorburns continued on with life as if nothing ever happened. Rick made sure to have taken the proper measures to not get caught red-handed with her body, because he was sure to go on routes where there were no surveillance, no cameras, and he left his phone at home so it wouldn't ping off cellular towers on the way to the river. Josh said Rick didn't want them home the day that he took Tia to the river.
During that discussion at home, did he discuss with you the intricacies of how she was killed?
No. I still don't know what happened there. I just know that he did. That he did do it. And he said to us that it's best we don't know how it happened, because the less we know, the less we can tell.
When Tia's body was located, do you remember where you were?
Yeah, I remember it coming on the news first thing in the morning, and I was horrified. Just went to my gut straight away, just knew what it was, and I went into him, he was in bed, and I said, a body has been found in Pimpama River. I said, could it be it? He just said yes.
Did you ever think about how Tia died? Or the circumstances around it?
Yeah. I don't really want to know how she might have suffered or something. It was very upsetting. But no, I've no idea how she died.
After nearly a year of investigating, on September 19th, 2016, the Thorburns were all taken into custody and charged for their involvement in Tia's execution at the Binley District Court. Trent was charged and convicted of incest, attempting to pervert the court of justice, and 2 counts of perjury. In 2017, he was sentenced to 4 years but served only 16 months of that sentence, having been released in January of 2018. The oldest son, Joshua, pled guilty to perjury and attempting to pervert the court of justice. In July of 2017, he was sentenced to 15 months, having to serve only 3 months of that sentence, with the remainder of his time being suspended, which of course devastated Cindy. And Julene pleaded guilty in November of 2017 to perjury and attempting to pervert the court of justice. She spent 6 months behind bars. And last, and certainly the crummiest least, on September 20th, 2016, Rick was charged with the homicide of Tia. Now, shortly after his arrest, Rick had made a cowardly attempt at committing suicide, but failed and was taken to Princess Alexandra Hospital, where he was put in an induced coma, which caused him to miss his first court date. He had been on suicide watch for months following the incident. In May of 2018, after pleading guilty, Rick was sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years served before being eligible for parole in September of 2038. I want to move on and discuss a lot of irony and some details in this story. Now, there's a theory that Rick had unalived Tia because he too was S.A.ing her. S.A. meaning, sexually bruising, if you catch my drift. Apparently, he too was being accused of S.A.ing her and was fearful that Tia just might have been pregnant by him. Because you see, Tia kept complaining about stomach pains. And when she was complaining about stomach pains, that is why the 2 idiots, Rick and Trent, kept saying they thought she might have been pregnant. And that is why they were so much in a frenzy about people finding out about whether or not she was really pregnant. But the thing is, the autopsy states that she was never pregnant. Wow. And what's even crazier is, come to find out, Tia had made attempts to run away before, but it wasn't something that she tried to do once or even twice or even thrice. Tia had tried to run away 10 different times in the 9 months that she was living with the Thorburns. And the irony further in that is police knew from the jump that Rick had something to do with all of this because of all the times Tia had ran away. She was always able to be found just several hours later. So if this was something that she did all the time, then Rick's fake devastated reaction was a dead giveaway. He never reacted this way to her running away before. So all of the theatrics gave police the hunch something was wrong. The woman Julie, who had Tia before the Thorburns, said she did her best to keep up with Tia throughout her time with the Thorburns, and she remembers Tia stating how much she hated it there. Julie also stated that she possesses emails that were sent to the caseworkers in February of 2015, just 1 month after Tia moved in with the Thorburns, informing them how unhappy Tia was, saying, quote, she hated it there, and that Tia was only going to continue to run away. At that point, Tia had only been with the Thorburns for 1 month, so if Julie said Tia would continue to run away, she had already did so in just 1 month of living there. Damn. An unidentified witness told 7 News that they knew for a fact Tia was confiding in a friend about all she endured with the Thorburns. She allegedly told her friend how she was afraid to go home every day after school, that she was being used sexually by Trent, and that she allegedly made Julene aware of what was going on between herself and Trent, but it just went ignored by Julene. Now, On the contrary of all that, it's reported that Tia's grandmother, Sue Palmer, made different claims, telling the Courier Mail, an Australian publication, that Tia had the option to leave the Thorburns but chose to stay instead because she allegedly had a crush on 18-year-old Trent, and also because she loved the horses that the Thorburns had at their property. Sue said, quote, "We didn't have any idea as to what was actually happening there. Just that she had a crush on the boy, and that was the main reason she wanted to stay," end quote. Now, I'm not too sure why Sue said these things, if maybe she knew something Cindy or no one else knew, but by all other accounts, Tia was absolutely unhappy while staying with the Thorburns. Cindy had revealed how she observed Tia behave differently in the presence of Rick, in a fearful way, and she also made mentions of how she noticed a shift in the way Tia was even dressing. You see, Rick had began to purchase clothing that most would deem inappropriate for a young girl, such as short dresses, padded bras, and he even would take Tia to get her eyebrows waxed at 12 years old. In my personal opinion, these sound like all the signs of a predator grooming a young girl to have a more quote-unquote grown look, if you will. It was said that while Rick upheld a prestigious image to those in the public, behind closed doors, he was a monster, a control freak, and instilled fear in his family. He certainly had an astronomical level of arrogance about him because he had all the ashy audacity to step in as a pallbearer for Tia's funeral. Yes, Rick was one of the 6 people that escorted Tia's coffin into her funeral. Sick shit. Unfortunately, Tia wasn't Rick's only victim. You see, during Rick's incarceration in November of 2019, he pled guilty to 1 count of grape, I'll say grape for YouTube purposes, 2 counts of attempted grape, and 10 counts of indecent treatment of a child under 12 years old. He was sentenced to an additional 5 years behind bars. The little girls were 4 and 11 at the time, who were attending Julene's daycare center in their home. And even after Tia's demise, the Thorburns were still allowed to run that daycare center for up to 6 months because at that time they hadn't been charged with anything yet. So think about that. While Tia is gone, the Thorburns are going on living their lives at that point in time because nobody knew what happened to Tia just yet. This was before the anonymous tip came through in Crime Stoppers. These people were still taking care of little girls at their home for 6 months. So that means Rick had 6 more months of torturing and mistreating these little girls that were attending the daycare in his home. Just disgusting. Familia, I'm now at the point of the video where I give you my personal thoughts. I'm gonna go deep into how I feel. The level of sociopathic narcissism that this human Rick displayed throughout this entire tragedy is not unique in the realm of unfortunate tales. However, it's certainly astonishing and quite fascinating in a blasphemous way. You see, Rick had to be the star of the show, and by show, I mean the Rick show. He thrived off the attention that he received during this investigation. To Rick, everything revolved around him, and everything was on his terms. Hence, the fear that was instilled in his family versus respect. He also created this victimized persona when in fact he was the abuser. He was the predator with multiple victims under his belt. And what's crazier is even as recent as August 22nd, 2022, Rick had made another attempt at committing suicide, of course seeking attention, and this is years after his first suicide attempt. On August 22nd this year, he was found unresponsive in his cell, and right now, as I speak, recording this voiceover, he has been hospitalized and his condition is currently unknown.
They were acting a part. You know, he wanted to be the victim.
You think he enjoyed the attention?
He loved it. He must have. He went to great lengths to get it. great lengths.
After pleading guilty in 2019 to harming those little girls in Julian's daycare at their home, Rick put on his Woe Is Me act, and in 2020 he actually applied to have the guilty plea vacated because he claimed that his attorneys backed him into a corner and forced him to take the plea when he wasn't the most coherent. Because you see, Rick made claims to have lost some of his memory, his ability to read, his ability to write, and was even unable to recognize his own wife after being mishandled in prison by COs when he was being moved to a new cell. This incident allegedly happened just a couple months before the hearing requesting the vacate of the plea. But it was said that he wasn't mishandled, and instead he had actually gotten into a fight with other inmates. Either way, I'm glad he got tossed up. Anyways, the judge of that hearing was not having it and denied Rick's request to vacate the plea deal. Thank the Most High. The judge pretty much said Rick was calloused and had zero regards for any of the little girls who depended on him to provide them with a safe and stable environment and life, in which he clearly betrayed them. Therefore, he, the judge, is not interested in showing any remorse for him, Rick. This sick, perverted waste of a human vessel knew exactly what he did to Tia, yet he called the police himself, showing fake worry and concern for her disappearance, knowing what he did. In 2021, he tried to offer a cockamamie story to the courts and said that he had found a letter he had written to a psychologist back in 2017 that stated he accidentally unalived Tia and wanted it to be taken into consideration because he never had the chance to voice this in court. In the letter, he says how him and Tia had quote-unquote gotten into an argument, and she began to rebel by packing a bag and heading down their driveway, trying to run away as she had done so many times before. And he said he tried to tell her to come back into the house, telling her she was being silly. So when she kept going, he supposedly grabbed her to bring her back into the house, but she started screaming and cursing at him, and he said he told her to stop and she wouldn't, so he put his hand over her mouth while still holding on to her with his arm around her waist, and he said he accidentally suffocated her that way and that he never intended to harm her. If this isn't the mind of a maniac and a wannabe master manipulator, then I don't know what is. In June of 2021, Deputy State Coroner Jane Bentley shut down Rick's claims of accidentally suffocating Tia. She stated she found that Rick Thorburn deliberately unalived Tia at their residence between the hours of 7:30 and 9:30 p.m. on October 29th, 2015, most likely by way of being choked or asphyxiated. However, she's unable to determine the exact cause of unalive. And the utter disrespect for this man to have held her body in a casket and carry it into her funeral, the same body that he carried and dumped carelessly and heartlessly into the river. I mean, what the fudge? Like, studying this case really brought my blood to Arizona heat wave levels. This is definitely the angriest I think I've been while researching the story. And thank you to my Australian subby who asked me to cover this. You know, everything in me is begging the Most High for forgiveness for the thoughts that I hold in my mind on behalf of Rick Thorburn. And then you have Julene. Julene, you spineless, wicked-spirited, linty, dusty old doormat. The poorest excuse of a woman I've reported on thus far. How could you stay with, enable, and aid such an evil sack of crap? How could you still to this very day go and visit this man in prison? As a woman who was once a little girl, how could you stand by and watch what those girls went through and not budge to help them? How could you kiss your husband and lay with him every single night knowing who he was? Were you that desperate? Did you really believe you couldn't do any better? Was he taking that good care of you with that foster care money that you threw away all your morals for a monetized life? You even sat at Tia's funeral and cried as though you were so hurt when you were a part of her tragic ending. And not only did you aid that pus-filled walking demon, you also aided your crummy son in his actions instead of holding him accountable for being a pervert. You comforted him by telling him his father would quote-unquote deal with it when he told you what he'd done to Tia, when you should have dealt with it, Julene. You should have helped Tia and saved her and yourself from those monstrous men you shared a home with. I hope you live the rest of your life in public shame and go get some therapy to figure out why you lack significantly in empathy, sympathy, and why you have this protective nature over rapists and predators. Trent, you are a horrific, weird, sadistic, rotten apple that didn't fall far from the Thorburn tree. You lied on a little girl so you could have your way with her. And when your stupid ass thought you were in too deep, you threw her into the lion's den without thinking twice. This empty soul had the audacity to even dance at Tia's funeral in her memory. And the nerve of this moron to have gone on Tinder looking for love after he got out of jail. But thankfully, women recognized this weirdo and put him on blast. I mean, this family was literally hell sent. This case took extensive research due to all its details and media coverage. I had to read many articles and sit through so many videos about this horrid case. I currently have a 13-year-old daughter, and I could never imagine this ever happening to mine. And I won't even try to imagine it. I refuse to bear the pain behind a mere imagination of something so devastating. So imagine how Cindy feels actually having to live through this. Now, for the most part, in my comments, people can be a bit harsh. However, familia, I'm going to ask personally for you to extend grace to Cindy. You see, it's unfortunate that Cindy was in such a broken place in her life at the time and didn't have the willpower to level up her life for her daughter. However, I will never judge her for making the decision that she made. We cannot beat a dead horse. Cindy simply was not in a space to raise her little girl. She knew she wasn't available for her daughter in any capacity, so she sought help. Had she not sought out help, people would have said she should have. So that's what she did. She sought help from the government and trusted that they would place her daughter with a decent family after removing Tia from Julie. But unfortunately, as we hear too often, Tia fell victim to the demonic, soulless acts of a psychotic family. I did see that Cindy is suing the government for not vetting the Thorburns better, for ignoring Tia's runaway attempts, for ignoring the concerns of Julie sent in the emails, and for deeming Tia as a lying, troubled little girl when she needed help the most. However, I wasn't able to find where they are today with the suit. This story is a tale of greed, fear, and evil entities. The Thorburns were so obsessed over money that they literally handpicked the most vulnerable and weak prey that they could get their hands on for the easiest kill. Literally, they sought out the fragile feverishly for funds. The family feared their master so much, they worked together as a team to cover his lies. They were so arrogant in their choices that they continued to live life as normal as possible, thinking what they done would never get exposed. But if there's one law that I know all too well, it's the universal law of karma. What you put out is what you get back tenfold. Just look at them now. Rick is a suicidal nutcase. Jolene is a lonely old hag. Trent will never have a regular dating life. And Josh has a cloud hanging over him like the plague. I pray that this entire family lives in mental hell for the rest of their natural born lives. My heart goes out to Cindy. I'm sending her all the prayers for strength and healing. Tiahleigh Alyssa Rose Palmer would have been 19 years old this year, probably a freshman in college or running her own little business like most of the Gen Z kids out here today. Tia, sleep in spiritual peace, baby girl. Gone, but never, ever forgotten.